Hey everybody, welcome to the stream. Thanks for hanging out. It is Sunday night, and so we are back on the world building bandwagon. It is time to once again talk about our Dwarven campaign. Have I talked about the title of the campaign yet? I'm right now, the working title, and it may end up being the final title, is Helm and Crown, is what I'm thinking about calling it. Because of the two parties that I'm going to run through it. One of them focused on dungeoneering and exploration, and one of them focused on politics. Yeah, thanks for coming out. Oh, I forgot to get my chat window. Let me grab that real quick. I will be right back. Hey, everybody. Thanks for holding on while I got my chat window. What's going on, Brooke? Thanks for swinging by. Yeah, as I said, we are talking about the Dwarf campaign today, as we do every Sunday. This Sunday in particular, though, is a very special episode of the World Building stream. So, a little background. For the past month or so, maybe month and a half, I've been posting polls on our Twitter account to determine what specific topics of world building we're going to cover for the stream. Um, and those topics have varied. You've seen some of the videos we've posted, right? We talked about dwarven society and holidays. We talked about we didn't done history yet. We did monsters one week. We just did dwarven law, which was really interesting. Um, but every single week, in the bottom of the poll, I always put a category that just never won the election. It was always what about elves? Because there are definitely elves and other races in our setting in Coom, and we definitely need to talk about them at some point. But they just never won. They always came close. It was never like sometimes I guess it was a complete shutout, but it would always get a respectable showing, but it would never actually win. And I was talking to Brooke, one of our patrons, and she had said that sadly that she always votes for elves every time. And so I thought, well, it's time. It's time for the elves. But I didn't want to just declare that it was elves. Well, so what I did is I just posted a poll where four of the options were just elves. So we still had a vote, and one of the options still won. I do think it was what about elves, which I thought was funny, which has always been the bottom category. But yes, here we are. Now, as much as we are going to talk about elves tonight, we are also going to talk about yeah, they do need love. Elves of everywhere need love, Brooke. Elves of everywhere need love, Coom included. We are going to talk about some other races here too, because I do not know if elves will be a sufficient topic to cover us for the whole night. So we will start with elves, and we'll talk about their culture and their history, and some hooks and their politics, and some threats that either they might face or they might present to the party and to the dwarves. And then we'll talk a little bit about humans, similarly with their culture and history and yada yada yada. And then if we have time, we will talk about orcs. Now, the elves I have some really rough like grace note ideas on, but I don't have a lot of detail. And I think that's what we're going to get into tonight. Humans I have pretty well figured out. There's a couple small details I'd like to just hammer out, but I have a general sense of like where they belong in the campaign and sort of what they're up to. The orcs the orcs are kind of a conundrum for me because I definitely want them to be a part of the campaign. I definitely want to have there be this sense that Coom isn't just a monolith. It isn't just dwarves, right? I want there to be room for most of the races, especially because due to certain limitations in the overall setting of Ondune, a lot of, or not a lot, but a handful of the sort of the standard PC races are either unavailable at this time in history or just not very common. So like tieflings, for example, just don't. I mean, they can exist. If a player came to me and was really passionate about playing a tiefling in any time period before the Fourth Age, which is when All Hell Yogg takes place, yeah, we could make it work. We would have to figure out something special, and they would definitely fall more into the camp of you or your family did something to bring this transformation about, as opposed to them being sort of a full-fledged race like they are in the Fourth Age. Dark elves are pretty similar, but dark elves are essentially just tieflings for elves, right? They're just the equivalency. Um, Gnomes are pretty rare. There's a lot of the races I've kind of relegated to particular biomes. So the gnomes have a small country inside the bounds of Thorpe that's theirs. Tabaxi are kind of rare. Although, you know what? I think if somebody came to me and said, I want to play a Tabaxi from this part of the world, I like the idea of like a snow leopard Tabaxi. I think it's kind of cool. Maybe Tabaxi could be a little bit more widespread. I do think of them as being not very populous. But anyway, we're getting pretty off topic. So I wanted to make sure that there were other races in Coom that weren't just dwarves. While I would love to have our core cast, the two parties of 3 and 3 of our main characters all be dwarves, I liked the idea that we're going to have a roster of guests as well, kind of like we do with Yogg with the sort of rotating cast, and that those players could play members of any race. So I wanted there to be a presence for both elves and humans and orcs in Coom, as those are some of the big major races of the world beyond just dwarves. There are furbolgs, actually, Brooke. They are relatively rare, and they are done. They're done pretty differently from how they're done in other settings. I had a difficult time with furbolgs when they first came out. Like, I think they're cool, but I just this is one of the this is kind of that street I went on a couple weeks ago, all about how they're just. It feels like there are too many monsters in D&D. You're kind of constantly having to. When new stuff comes out and new players come to you and say, hey, I want to play this, you don't want to be the kind of DM who says, no, they don't exist. But you have to sort of now incorporate furbolgs and kenku and tritons and tabaxi and turtles and every other new thing into your world. But furbolgs do exist, to answer your question. They are kind of rare, and they are much more like fae spirits. The idea behind a furbolg, it's definitely a playable race, and I anticipate that we might see 1 or 2 of them in the campaign. The idea is that they basically, like, I don't know exactly where they come from, but I like the notion that they are extremely solitary and they are extremely cantankerous. So one furbolg will, like, take ownership over a particular sort of site in nature. So this furbolg is kind of like the old man of the mountain, and they live on this mountain slope, and they are, like, extremely protective of that slope. If anyone comes, any miners come in, if any, hikers or backpackers move through the area, the furbolg is, always kind of trying to drive them off. They take this, like, custodianship over these different natural sites. And especially when no population or no civilization has been in an area for a long time, that has a tendency to spring up these furbolgs. So I like the idea that Coom, it's exactly get off my lawn. They think of it less as, like, this is my mountain, and more about, like, I have to preserve the mountain. That, like, civilization is functionally an evil that will, carpet over all the natural beauty of the world. So they're, of course, great rangers. They're, of course, great druids, obviously. They're also great barbarians. I can see that sort of, like, unfriendliness boiling over into actual rage. And I like the notion that since Coom has essentially been abandoned for 500 years, that, yeah, you probably have almost like an infestation of furbolgs, that these furbolgs either are, like, much more like fae, they just kind of appear, or, like, almost created or generated by the wilderness, or they were drawn to it. I like the idea that, like, a primordial wilderness left alone for X number of years will eventually just kind of, like, spawn a furbolg. Maybe there's a story about how, this particular furbolg was once just a boulder that eventually gained sentience and then began to, like, ward and protect the area and manage things. I like the idea that furbolgs are very concerned about, like, what the other animals think of each other and stuff like that. Like, oh, these deer don't get along with those deer. Kind of like old people who get really invested in the politics of, like, their squirrels and their hummingbird feeders. That was kind of the vibe I had, where they have this very, like, cranky retiree kind of a vibe. I don't know. That's what they are right now. I mean, if a player came to me and said, I want to play, like, a baby furbolg, or I want to play a furbolg who came from a village, like, we would figure it out. But that's kind of my go-to right now. Anyway, that has nothing to do with elves. So let's jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about elves and humans and orcs, but we'll start with our elves, and I want to put most of our focus here. I want to really make sure the elves get nailed down before we jump into anything else. So let's talk about, like, in summary, and, like, what we know so far about the elves. The idea here was that if one of the primary conflicts of the campaign, one of the like primary, the primary conflict of the campaign is essentially that all of these dwarves have left their homeland hundreds of years ago and now are drawn back to their homeland for basically mysterious reasons. Yo, what up, Alan? Thanks for coming. So the dwarves have all left Coombe. They've taken off and they've run into they've kind of scattered into Rubicos. And this was very painful for them, and this is kind of like the big watershed moment of dwarven history in the history of the world, right? It's this terrible sort of fall of their kingdom. And I especially liked that being like what the dwarves almost would consider their great failing. I feel like there were probably many dwarven clans who didn't want to leave, and who felt like by leaving they were going completely against their natures, right? That's like the last thing that you should do as a dwarf. You hold your ground, you stand in the line. And so if that is this big, like, seminal tragedy, right, the scene is this, like, great failing of the dwarven people. Like, I imagine they look back on it almost in the way that we would look back on, like, internment camps or something in America, right? Like, this sin of their forefathers. That now these young, enterprising dwarves are coming back and trying to reclaim and trying to, like, make amends for what they consider to be, the failings of their forebears. Well, if that's your political and, like, mental landscape for these dwarves, what would be more sort of wounding or infuriating or dramatic if there were a group of people who, when faced with the same choice, didn't flee and stayed, right? In particular, a group of people sort of known to be flighty or chaotic or like not nearly as steadfast and stalwart as the dwarves. So the idea was that the wood elves of Coombe, who in my setting are a little bit more conservative and like staunch in their ways than they are in some other settings. Definitely to a dwarf, an elf is still kind of a like rootless wanderer, right, who likes to sing songs and climb trees. But compared to other elves in other settings, my wood elves are a little bit severe. But the idea is that they, for whatever reason, and that's what we'll discuss tonight, decided not to leave. They didn't abandon Coombe. They stayed in their forest. In the small areas of Coombe that they occupied, and they basically weathered the Seven Sorrows. They endured the endless winter, and for whatever reason did not depart in the way that the dwarves did. So that way when the dwarves come back, there's a tension immediately, because I feel like the elves would blame the sorrows and blame the catastrophe that came down upon their homeland on the dwarves. So you get a little bit of that Lothlorien, Balrog, Moria vibe, which feels very Tolkien, which is one of course, the big touchstones for the campaign. But then, B, you get to look at like what happens to a culture that endures a tragedy, that endures this great calamity. Like, I almost like the idea that these elves are sort of scary, post-apocalyptic, survivalist elves. And they are functionally unrecognizable to either what elves they used to be or what like an average player would think of as an elf. So that's basically the premise. The core idea is like, I liked the term snow elves. I thought had a cool tone, if you're going to give them kind of like a sub-race sort of a name. But they were originally wood elves that were sort of trapped here. They're all buff. But that's exactly right. They're made for winter, and they've like been dwelling here. And that's another thing that's interesting, right, is that they are not, because of how long they live, it's been 500 years. That's really only like a generation for them. But maybe something has happened. Maybe the elven lives have gotten cheaper or not shorter, but maybe they've been living more like humans or something like that to create multiple generations because the conditions are so horrible. So let's talk about them a little bit. Let's talk about their history, and let's talk about what happened to them, and then maybe let's talk about what they became. So a little bit more background. I know it's a lot of me talking. I like snow elves too. They might not be the name they apply to themselves, but I like that being the sort of colloquial name that gets attributed to them, probably by humans, I would imagine. Younger generations built for winter. Yeah, I think that's cool. Especially, I think maybe it's been like the turning of a generation or whatever occurred in the middle. So you have like 200 and 300 year old, or even like the elves that were born right away as it began, now can like look back and have like faint memories of like, oh, I remember when the snow wouldn't stop falling, and I remember when the trees began to die, and I remember when the dragons hunted the wood and things like that. So the ideas here. So a little bit of background on elves in on Dune and how they work. We have four ages, and way back in antiquity, all the elves were one race, the High and the Wood. The Drow exist, as we alluded to in Coom, or sorry, the Drow exist in Undune, but they are not a unified people at this time. It's like an elf that becomes corrupted may become a Drow or a Dark Elf or a Zvartoy, I think is the elven term for it. Again, we use probably Dark Elf more than you would use Drow. They don't live underground. They're much more just like tieflings for elves, and they're purple skinned. But anyway, the idea is that they were once one great race, and there was a schism, and the schism was along class lines. You had like the aristocracy, who were very sort of human friendly and about academia and intelligentsia, right? And then you had sort of the worker class who were much more sort of salt of the earth and like hunters and foresters and ranger types, which made the vast majority of the elven population. And there was a schism and a civil war, and then the two uh, uh, factions split, and you ended up with your high elves, who are the rarer but more arcane and wizardly aristocracy, and then like the big bulk of the working class, who are what you would traditionally call wood elves. That wood elven revolution founded the nation of Symbia, which anyone who's a fan of Al Yog will know is the big wood elven nation in Undune. And it's a very conservative, repressive government. Kind of think like People's Republic of China, right? Where it's protected and it's safe, and there are like a lot of government programs and things like that. But it is anyone else would look at it as a totalitarian regime, right? They're ruled by druids, and they're very concerned about border security. It's a little bit like North Korea in a certain sense, where the nation is very hostile to the rest of the world, and they want to preserve their traditional elven values, which is interesting because I think that puts them on a lot of even footing in some ways with some of the more extremist or traditionalist dwarven factions too. So I like the idea that there's some common ground. They don't like each other, but they have a lot of similar ideologies. Um, oh, I like if they're straight carnivores now. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So this is one thing we should talk about too, because that's a very orcish cultural idea. The orcs in my setting are very much like Inuits or Mongols, in that even though they came from like a sort of beautiful pastoral wilderness, have religious beliefs that basically say they're not allowed to take from the land, and that the animals were put there to feed and house them. So the orcs also kind of have that cultural thing, but that might be interesting to make sort of a convergent evolution thing. I'll write that idea down. Yeah, like all carnivores only subsist on hunting. Yeah, definitely. That's cool. So anyway, one of the things that happened when the elves split into their two factions is that you had Symbia kind of became, again, it's like a totalitarian power. It started to install these like satellite colonies in forests all across the world, and they basically used druidic magic to transport between them. So you can get colonies to Symbia that spring up in like totally remote, crazy places that Symbia doesn't really have any ability to get to. So it's almost like a corporation or something like that. Like it's this multinational nation with these little like colonies all over the place wherever you get enough forest for the sort of druidic magic to allow them to trade. So I guess my question was, where did these elves in Coom come from? Rubicos is naturally the land of the dwarves. I don't believe way back in antiquity there were elves here. It was just dwarves back way, way, way back when. So they would have to be colonizers in a certain sense, and it kind of makes sense to tie that to this period of history when Symbia has basically thrown off the shackles of its oppressors and is sort of, you know, declared that, all elves will live free or whatever. And is making their little satellite states all over the place. So it seems to make sense that the elves of Coom, and they live in some kind of particular wood, right? Like the way I do a lot of woods in I do kind of the FR style wood names, where it's a lot of like, the Rude Wood or the Fang Wood or whatever. I think we've established 3 big forests right now. We have the Womb Wood, which is the big one in Emeros that most of them are from, kind of our Mirkwood, like our huge, massive, impassable forest. We have the Torchwood, Baruch, which exists in Rubicos, but in the far south, which is basically like a forest that's next to a volcano. And then we have the I can't talk. We have the Unwood in Yawgmoth, which was like a regular forest that was turned into an evil, creepy drow forest. Oh, hey, Vaughn. Thanks for coming. Yeah, that's exactly why they play it. Point and click interfaces. Get out of here. Good lord. I was going to make it just a joke about how they play a lot of adventure games, but then you made a really just repulsive pun. So it makes sense to me that they would have been founded in the Second Age then. So they're not a particularly old. They haven't been in Coombe since antiquity. They've been there for a while, but not since way back when. I think that makes sense. What's the deal with this forest? In my head right now, in my kind of map in my head that I haven't actually put down to paper, it's kind of like in the north. It's near the Cloud Peaks. Forests. I feel like it's gotta be evergreen, right? Evergreen forest. You're up in the mountains, like maybe it has some temperate. Yeah, what if it's like temperate reaches, but evergreen heart? So it's like, I'm imagining like a big vale or something like that, right? Like the Cloud Peaks are the mountains that have the floating peaks because they have wing rock in them. And I'm imagining like, this big forest that sweeps down this whole Coombe. It's kind of interesting if like its sort of roots, quote unquote, if it's like fingers are temperate forest, but the higher up you get into the mountains, obviously it becomes evergreen. Pine elves, that's really cool, yeah. Because one thing I think you could do, I love the idea of the forest dying over the course of the endless winter, that like the temperate, if there are a lot of temperate trees, especially even just on the fringes, that they go dead and are bare. Because then you could get some cool name like the Bare Wood or the Dead Wood, or like the Corpse Wood or something like that. It has a cool tone if it's all these like naked trees. I mean, is the winter long enough that it also kills the evergreen trees? And then it's just like all this dead forest. Chewing on cones, dog. That's what they do. They chewing on snow cones, Alan. They chew on snow cones. But they also have their lifespans where they show their age. Ooh, that's cool. I like that. They show their age. They retain their long lifespans, but show their age more than other elves. That's really cool. I had kind of imagined like a cool white hair thing, right? Almost like the drow, like their skin gets really drawn and gray. Almost like the ash elves or the gray elves or whatever they are in FR. Yeah, I love that idea that you would meet this old elf and that like they have like the wrinkles in their face and stuff like that. Like maybe they show age, maybe it's just like the pure like worry and anxiety of having to live in this like very harsh climate. I like that. So I think that like in the Second Age then, Symbia establishes a colony. I think living in caves is probably just too drow for them. I want to talk about that with orcs, because I think that might be a good way to distinguish them from orcs. Orcs would, because here's the problem, is that I love the idea of these elves having stayed here and survived and done all their stuff. Right? And lived and like held to their principles in the way that dwarves didn't. But the orcs that are here would have basically had to do the same thing. So I had an idea that there were some orcs that lived there, because the orcs aren't native to Coombe. They were invited to Coombe in the ancient past. Honestly, like they would be older in Coombe than the elves would be, and they were invited by dwarves. Again, thinking that these are the orcs before they're corrupted. So I wonder if one thing we do here, I had an idea that like if the orcs stayed, which I imagine they did, maybe it was the orcs that sought refuge in the caves. And that's how you got like Grimlocks and stuff, right? Because the orcs in my setting again are kind of Mongolian. They herd animals and they live in yurts, and they're less about like rampaging and bloodlust and more about husbandry and animals and sort of nature spirits and stuff like that. The Barebone Forest. It's kind of cool. Names. I like to put wood in there. The Bone Wood is cool. Deadwood. Barkbone has a cool feel, though. Barebone Forest. I'm going to put the Deadwood. I mean, I know you can't really do Deadwood, but you understand. That's fine. Deadwood is an idea. I like Corpse Wood. I think Bearwood is good as well. Bearwood. So I think maybe the orcs went underground because my idea was that like they became Grimlocks, right? Which are the orcs also breed really really quickly comparatively to elves. Um, so they became the sort of eyeless, Morlocky, running around creatures that are also in the monster manual. So we'll get to orcs. I don't think that the elves were pushed underground. I think that the elves stayed and tried to live in the endless, harsh Inuit-like winter. Um, I think that just makes them tougher and cooler. So Symbia established a colony here in the Second Age. They made, so this would have been before. So at one point in Symbian history, they basically cut off all ties with the outside world and no longer allow any immigration, anything like that. It takes them a while, but the official like hammer comes down at the beginning of the Third Age, which would be post Seven Sorrows. So this is pre Seven Sorrows, but post Symbia. They make peace with the Dwarven Kingdom and agree to shepherd forest and provide. I like the idea that like they establish this colony. They establish. Oh, we're gonna have that. There's initial tension as the dwarves have long forested. Have long logged the forest. This forest for firewood, but a peace is eventually reached. The elves provide the dwarves with deadfall and keep, you know, they probably even allow some logging. And, you know, husband the forest and the trees. This is like, you know, good times, basically. What's the, like, turnaround? Like, what do the elves provide to the dwarves to allow them to live there? Hey, what's up, Jose? Thanks for coming. Oh, no, dude. You're fine. Like, what is the trade-off there? What do the dwarves get from having the elves there? I mean, do they just, like... Because I like the idea of Symbia basically claiming that, like, all forests everywhere belong to the elves. The wood elves, and the dwarves having to negotiate that. I don't know exactly what the exchange is, but it's something to ponder. Like, what is the dwarven side of the deal? I like the idea that they because then you could make this interesting thing of like the dwarves. If the dwarves and the elves in antiquity in the Second Age make an agreement, right? They basically like sign a pact of some kind. And then if the dwarves leave, would the elves view that as them breaking the pact? Because I think that's a cool idea. Like, these comeuppances, that the elves would hold this ancient grudge against the dwarves for not only abandoning them, but specifically for breaking their agreement, I think is nice. Veterinary. Super hairy ears. Hairy ears, specifically? Why? Oh, like, to protect them from the... Yeah, I feel like that looks goofy. I feel like they look like dogs, then, or wolves. I could see them having like shorter ears or something like that. Keep the surface safe from threats. That's cool. Yeah, they guard the deal. The elves provide some lumber, and I mean they could also just trade with them too, right? I don't know if they can sing the trees to grow. They do at one point, though it's later. It's post Seven Sorrows. They do basically awaken the trees in a war against civilization. Essentially, they create treants, which we call tree folk in this setting, and it turns their homeland into this like impassable labyrinth of forest that only elves know how to navigate. It's a mythal, I think, is the term in FR, like a big spell that's persistent. Provide some lumber and protect the forest. In exchange, the dwarves defend the forest from underground threats. Something like that's cool. I feel like there might be some trade. Just pour up into the forest once the dwarves abandon their posts. Yeah. When the dwarves flee Coombe, they abandon the gates that once protected the forest, and whatever threats from below now pour up. So is there... Because in terms of like threats from below, there are a couple of options. Goblins are a big one in this part of the world, but I feel like goblins are the kind of thing that wood elves could handle, you know? I wouldn't... I think it would be kind of silly if these, like... I mean, maybe the point is that it's not a very warlike colony. You know, I think of the elves as being... The wood elves as being, like, very Legolas-esque, like, rangers and, you know, woodland warrior kind of a things. But maybe the point is to contrast them with, like, where they end up being these kind of, like, brutal ranger survivalist types, and they start off as being, like, a relatively small, relatively peaceful kind of delegation. Might be kind of interesting. If there's not a lot of... They don't have this sort of warlike tradition. Yeah, that's... You're saying that the dwarves provide the lumber? Because I think the elves definitely do. I think the elves, like, specifically give them deadfall and, like, choose which trees can be cut down and stuff like that. I think they have the power to awaken trees, but they don't think they've done it, like, en masse. And I don't think they've given them, like, sentience, right? Like, druids can still cast things like tree form or, you know, animate trees or whatever. They can still do that, but they haven't done it on, like, a grand scale. There's no treants in the world at this time. There are probably, like, evil sentient trees here and there, but it's not, like, a big, widespread phenomenon. So, like, what threat is that? Because, like, I could definitely see troglodytes being a concern, but I don't think troglodytes are going out into the sun, you know? And trogs only come up at the end of the Seven Sorrows. So, like, is there a unique threat that lives in this area that they protect against? They can help a tree grow to a certain way the dwarves need specifically. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Interesting. That's cool. Provide lumber, some grown specifically for the dwarven needs. Specifically for the... That's cool, Jose. I like that. Specifically for dwarven needs. And they protect the forest. Well, they don't really protect the forest. They're and in exchange, the dwarves protect the forest from underground threats. The dwarves flee Coombe. They abandon the gates. The ones protected the gates. I mean, it's metaphorical gates, right? Like, they abandon their posts. That's cool. Just trying to think, like, is there a unique... Because I feel like there's something cool about, okay, if the party has to go to this forest, then it's haunted by this particular kind of monster more than other places. Goblins are so chaotic and disorganized that they don't really feel like they would pose a huge threat. Like, definitely, you know, you could use them now and again as bad guys to threaten the elves. They're not like mind flayers or anything like that in this part of the world at this time. Darrow are too weird and isolated and not particularly violent. There's giants, I guess, like frost giants. But there wouldn't be giants underground that would be a big threat to the elves. Well, we can come back to it. I'm just curious as to what that would be, because I feel like it would factor into any adventure that you might stage there. The trogs could become a threat once the Seven Sorrows has already happened, but they don't get into, like, they're one of the Seven Sorrows. And I also feel like maybe they're like trog raids at night could be kind of cool, that they, like, strike out from these things and come back. Like, post Seven Sorrows, I think the trogs could work. At least somewhat. One of the enemies. The dwarves created more enemies. The troglodytes. Mount night raids into Elven. I think that they, like, probably have sunlight sensitivity. So it can't really strike out in the day. Again, you got to imagine we're talking about a xenomorph here, and just, like, seeing a xenomorph, like, creeping around in the forest during the day is, like, not particularly scary. Really attack during the day, but I like during the night. Goblins, maybe. avalanche. Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting. Jose's saying they could be like anti-aircraft. Yeah, the elves can. The threats from the mountain itself to avalanche. Yeah, seismic activities. They keep the mountain calm. Yeah, that's cool. They protect the mountain, keep it calm. I wonder if we'll get into humans in a little bit too. I wonder if like, oh yeah, like rocks, that's cool. Like rock, the bird, not rock, the rock. Um, but I like the idea of the dwarves also protecting the forest against human logging, right? That like humans would be in the area too, and so because they've made this pact with the dwarves prevent humans from overlogging the forest as well. So they protect it from goblins. I think they could like shape the avalanches and stuff. That's cool. Seismic activity, maybe. And then they would also protect the forest. It's like almost like a national park or something, right? It's like protected by, maybe there's even like a dwarven clan who specifically, is like maybe loyal to the Cloud Peaks because it's in that area. Potentially, depends on when we draw on the map. And they like were the ones who first encountered the elves, and they were like, I mean, hell, you could do like a clan whose thing is lumber, right? They do wood or like fuel for fires, and they're the ones that ended up brokering this peace with the elves and made this agreement, and they're the ones that interface and protect, and they're the clan that abandoned. Or it could be the Dwarven Crown too, because that's like more interesting. But I like the idea of there being like a clan that specifically interfaces with the elves. Okay, cool. Let me bump that over. Dwarven clan who once provided lumber and fuel for other dwarven clans is now the clan that interfaces with the elven population of the name Wood. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, like a lumber clan. Lumber clan, eh? Yeah, I mean, basically, that's Jose. That's huge, actually, in my setting. Is the kind of like environmental struggle between humans trying to basically spread and industrialize, and the elves trying to protect the forest. Yeah, it's massive. Now, an industrial spill accident, which gave the forest sick from underneath, not intentional but difficult to forgive. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, let's start with the Seven Sorrows. So they have this agreement. And I think it's tenuous. I think there were problems with it, but they managed to make it work, right? The winters are hard there, but the dwarves help them and protect them and things like that. I mean, maybe they built the elves like a winter, like a stronghold or something. They the dwarves constructed something for them. During the Seven Sorrows, I mean, I think there could definitely be some kind of industrial spill / accident that's interesting. I think that to me, and I could be wrong, to me it seems cooler if it's just like the sheer fucking winter that just slowly drains and kills the life out of the forest. Do you know what I mean? Like, if winter never broke, what would it do to the trees there? Like, I mean, obviously there are trees in Siberia or whatever that just exist and are used to being in the cold, but I don't think any of these trees are those trees. Like, they're used to the life cycle, But I guess that's what an evergreen tree is. I like the idea of the winter being so cold and so oppressive that it even kills or like begins to like rot away or damage or change the evergreen trees. So having it be like an industrial spill or like a chemical thing, to me, makes it feel like the trees were poisoned, which again I think is cool. It does happen. This is one of the problems we run into, is that world building from the top down is that there is a similar effect that happens across the world in Symbia around the same time. So you wouldn't want to like exactly copy it, but I think there's something. Maybe it's like an avalanche or something like that, like you suggested. Like, oh, what do they get trapped? Maybe they get trapped. Maybe the dwarves fail to protect against an avalanche or something like that, and then if they're living in this like closed-in veil, it like collapses. It was like the seismic activity from the earthquake, and then the dwarves like never bury them out; they just run. Kind of cool, right? If they get buried in. An avalanche. I guess then it's like the elves don't like make a decision to stay. They just are trapped there. Well, let's write it down. It's a cool idea. One option. An avalanche traps the elves in their valley, and the dwarves never arrive to help them clean it up. They remain trapped in the valley as blizzard after blizzard ravages their home. I think that's kind of cool, you know? And then that's one of the things we're going to talk about too, is the idea of like if there's a glacier or something basically that like forms there, that as the campaign begins, the winter is slowly starting to break, and so that area might melt, or some of the snow that's like trapping them in, you know, might begin to abate, and that would give them the opportunity to leave if they want to. Another thing we might have to like, if frozen in a mountain slide, ages later they're the Captain America of Goom. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a cool idea, actually. Not that they get like flash frozen, but that they don't know what's going on in the wider world. They have no trade and no traffic. Like, they're literally shut in, you know? It's kind of cool. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think it's cooler if they're trapped, or do you think it's cooler if they elect to stay, you know? Because I feel like there's a cool power of the elves doing what the dwarves didn't do. The dwarves should have stayed. That's what dwarves do. And they, again, and some of them did, like, obviously, and were lost or whatever. But I feel like it doesn't diminish the elves' choice. Is that more interesting than them being trapped? Because I think them being trapped, you do get that sense of betrayal if it was the dwarves' sort of responsibility to prevent these things from happening, and they failed, right? What do you guys think? You think elect to stay is better? Yeah, why? You know what I mean? That's what I don't understand. And this is the other thing that we have to overcome, is this idea that, like, so one second. I agree with you, Brooke. I do think it's more dramatically interesting, but I can't figure it out. Like, I can't hack it. So if the way that Symbia works is that the elves that run the Wood Elven nation, like the druidocracy or whatever, right? It's basically a magocracy, like a ruling by magic, but specifically with druids. If they figure out a way to essentially interconnect forests around the world magically, which is functionally what they do in the Second Age, then if this catastrophe befalls the Bonewood or the Barebone Forest or whatever we want to call it, right? If that happens, then what prevents the elves from just basically ringing up Symbia and asking for evac? Like, why don't they leave if they have a means to do it, like, magically through the forest? And that was something we'd have to deal with if they were trapped too, right? It could be just a principle thing that this is their home and they don't leave. But again, it's like, if the elves do that, why would the dwarves en masse leave, right? If the elves stayed. Again, I think that's a cool conflict, and I want to deal with it. But I got to find some way to spin it. There has to be some, like, condition or something that, like, prevented them from just porting out, basically, which is what they would do if they had access to, you know, all of Symbia's powers. Because they're stuck. But I feel like that should be a facet. Okay. Oh, it totally makes sense. I think that, like, because you could do a political thing with it too, right? That's the other thing we're not talking about right now, is like, how politically are they structured? Do the elves have political power to make decisions like that? How are they ruled? In Symbia, as we know it thus far in Ondune, there's a king and a queen, and it's like the king is a druid, and it's like this long line of druid. At least in All Hell Yogg, the king is a druid. It can be king or queen, and there's no gendered things there. But it's this one unbroken line of druids. It's like this one lineage that has gone all the way back to Queen Dai, D-A-I, I think, at the beginning of the sort of formation of the kingdom. And it's only broken in All Hell Yogg when Yogg kidnaps the vessel. the young princess Nimria. I was like, God, what is her name? Nimria. Um, so they definitely are monarchical in in Symbia, but that doesn't mean they have to be here, right? This is like a remote colony, and they could have a different structure. Who rules the elves? How do they rule them? What's going on? It does seem like if you have this catastrophe happen, you kind of have to change the social order in a big way, right? Like again, I'm imagining like a Mad Max situation that like you go from having what's a function like a functioning government to like roving bands of marauders. Um, but I don't know if they would go that far, right? Do we want to go all the way to like scary skull painted war bands of elves? Because that's cool, and I'm fine with it. But we have to make a decision about what's most narratively interesting here. It would be cool to see elves sort of degenerate into what we sort of traditionally think of as orcs. And I like the idea of these like very fair-faced, pretty-looking sort of purgers. You know what I mean? I think it's kind of neat that they're still fair to look upon, but they're grim and perilous. You know, I think that's neat. So I think something about like roving war bands is kind of cool. War bands, like, but they're kind of squabbling with each other, you know, and that they've like been trapped but are forced to kind of turn inward against each other. Why don't they leave? Maybe they. I mean, like again, if you want to trap them, trap them. You say that something about the catastrophe that befalls the wood prevents them from teleporting out, or Symbia loses contact with them when everything bad goes down and they're unable to. I mean, the forest could burn potentially as well as the other option. I mean, there's the volcano explosion and like the ash that comes out if you wanted to find some way to devastate it. But again, like I like it better if it's just like the sheer cold and the sheer winter of it is what kills them, what drives them out. Not drives them out, but you know what I mean. Cheerocracy. They just scatter. Interesting. So they're just individual elves now? That's cool. It's interesting. It's definitely different than anyone else. I mean, the furbolgs, I guess, are kind of like that, but it wasn't like because of a catastrophe. Are you imagining like a post-apocalyptic, like The Road situation where it's like small family units that go out? They stop breeding, I guess, you know. I do think they're concentrated essentially in their little area, but I think that's kind of neat. I think if you were to do that, I think it would be like maybe the majority of the elven population are kind of like wanderers and loners, you know, but you sometimes come across little groups, little pockets. Either they're like little family groups, you know, maybe they're not actually family, but they're sort of like Walking Dead style groups that have banded together. And then I think you sometimes do come across like they're relatively rare, but like a not insubstantial number of the population is basically like ganged up. You know what I mean? In these little like marauding, roving bands. I like the idea of like, oh no, and like Darkstone kind of does this, right? Like, oh no, it's elves. Elves are attacking us. Has a kind of cool tone to it. Creates the petrified forest zone. Yeah, I think that's kind of cool if the forest becomes sort of petrified as a result of that. So let's look at culture. Are they solitary? Do they wander? Yeah, has their society completely collapsed? Well, the problem with that is that, like, I think it's cool. I think it's the most interesting option we have so far, rather than just, like, they're Mad Max raiders. Has society completely collapsed? Are they wandering alone? Alone, or in small family groups, or completely, or very occasionally in raiding bands. The problem with that is that, like, from a narrative standpoint, in terms of like what can the campaign do, it's hard to like have this sense of like elves betrayed dwarves if it's just like if there's no concentrated power of elves. You know, if there's no need to go to the elves with an emissary and say, hey, we actually need to take this road through the forest. If there's no central power, then it would be relatively easy to do that. Maybe you get attacked by the odd elf or something like that, but it wouldn't feel like we need to broker a peace or we need to come to terms or we have to fight a war. You know, if they're completely decentralized, they become wandering monsters and not like a political power in the area, which maybe is interesting. But again, we're trying to just talk out all the options and all the like the way it shakes out. High school clicks. Yeah, that's the thing. It's cool. I think I think they need to have a little bit more central. Like again, I like it, and I think it's definitely true in some cases. I do think that there are some elves that have done that. That like whatever power structure used to exist no longer exists, right? And that means that there were lots of elves that were functionally displaced. So I think you probably do get some of that, and you might even find some of those elves like outside of the forest or outside of the valley or whatever, right? Like that they've managed to find some way out, but they're just like hopeless. I like the idea that they can't breed. I think that's cool because it plays into the idea, like a weirdly starkly tall figure moving between the trees, hair dragging through the snow behind her. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think that like culturally, they're hopeless. Well, I think they can't breed any longer. Maybe because they don't want to. Maybe because of the harsh conditions. Maybe. So one thing that's true of all elves. Yeah, but like the question is that if they're nomadic, if they can move wherever they want to, and they definitely think they move around in the forest for sure. But if they can go wherever they want in Coombe, then why couldn't they leave Coombe? Why wouldn't they just leave the place? You know, who want to bring an elf into this? But yeah, I like the idea that it almost is a Children of Men thing where they are like there's something has happened to their society that has basically given them this time clock. And the elves live for a very long time, right? Like as you said, Brooke. And this is what the cool thing is, that if you do this, if that like the last generation of elves was born like the day or like the around the time of the Seven Sorrows, you know, you might still have some old elves that were around before then because elves can live to be 1,000 years. But you'd have this generation, the last generation of snow elves who are 500 years old and showing it, you know, and they look weathered, and like there wouldn't be an elf that wouldn't have seen everything. And I think that's really fascinating. That every single elf that you meet was there the day when all these things went down. And I think if they've stopped breeding, then they might just stop, right? Or maybe they stop breeding for a while, and then like at some point either in the campaign or before the campaign. Well, yeah, I mean I think we have to figure it out. Because I like the idea of them sticking around. Obviously, they stick around. Are they? If they're not trapped, then I think that's fine. But if they are trapped, then it seems like why, if one elf could find their way out of the Vale, why wouldn't they all find their way out? You know, travel is definitely difficult, but these are elves we're talking about, and presumably these are elves who have been living in these conditions for hundreds of years. Maybe because of the harsh conditions. The last generation of snow elves born, was born near or we don't need born near or around the Seven Sorrows. No new elven children have been born since. Every snow elf you meet remembers every day of the Seven Sorrows. Like they remember everything. And they've all gone through some tragedy, right? They've all had someone die. They've all had to starve. They've all had to do all these terrible things. Like it breeds this like bitterness and this resentment inside them. Yeah. Could have maintained or somehow underpinned their ability to try. That's true. Look at you spelling symbiote. Oh, I suppose it's on here, but like I was saying, good for you. The air quality is above X, and X is not what it chooses for. It needs to be fixed. A circular thinking trap. I don't know if it's biological. I like the idea. Like maybe it's biological, but I like the idea that again, in Children of Men, it's just a thing that happens to them, to the people, and there's no like they try to solve it with science. They try to figure it out. Like druidic magic doesn't work, and like so then I think the self-defeating cycle is that like they think it doesn't work. They think they can't breed anymore. They can't have children. and then because they think they can't, they stop trying. And so maybe there's this sense that they could have, or it would have worked, or it would have been rare but possible, but they lose their hope, they lose their interest in children, they lose their interest in the world. And that's one thing that I think is really cool, is that one of the ideas I'm playing with culturally for elves as a whole is that love is really important to them as a people, and that over the course of their long lives, they don't have, like, whereas dwarves marry and like make these relationships for life that are like almost aromantic in a certain way. They're all about collaboration and working together. Like, you marry your your creative partner. You don't marry someone that you have like a romantic or sexual attraction to. Elves are all about romance and sex and attraction. And so the notion of this the culture losing its most important aspect or element, that like the elves don't love anymore, and like, are they even elves at that point? The snow elves are almost like the Darrow of the elves. They've lost the thing that makes them who they are. Like, elves love and dwarves create, and a Darrow can't create in the way that like a snow elf can't love. I think that's really, really key. I love that. Jake Skywalker. Matchmaking arc. Like pandas. Perhaps because the mortality rate during the Seven Sorrows is so high, that's what I think. I think they just stopped having children. I totally agree. I think it's just a cultural shift that happened where they stopped having them, and then when they tried to, it either didn't work or the children died very early. Like, the babies can't cut it in the cold. They like have no way to warm the infants. You know what I mean? Yeah, dude. And like, maybe they're just turning into orcs. But like, I love the idea of like they're not able to, like, that the fire, that the frost would seep into the wood, and it would make it very difficult for them to burn it anymore. So they can't get warm either. Or you do the opposite, and they have to they have to burn the forest to stay alive. Not that they don't burn the whole forest, right? But they have to start fires, right? Whereas before, they would have like magical means, or they would use druid powers. Do they have to burn wood to stay warm? What kind of betrayal of elven kind is that? I think, Alan, your idea, maybe it's the dwarves who maintained it. Babies are not carnivores. They literally couldn't feed them. Oh, that's so... Oh, this is so dark. Yeah, maybe there is a newborn cemetery that they encounter at some point. Yeah. This is dark. Do you like elves? Too bad. They're having a bad day. It's a bad day to be an elf. Whatever befell... Okay, where's the Seven Sorrows? Whatever befell the forest essentially killed it. It can no longer function like Symbia intends. And I think the thing with the Seven Sorrows too is that it happened over the course of a year, which it seems very fast to a dwarf or an elf, but it wouldn't be the kind of thing where, like, the minute the volcano blows, all the elves think, shit, we have to get out of here, right? Like, they see it blow and they're relatively distant from it, and it seems like a problem, but it would be more this creeping thing that, like, over the course of that year, the winter just wouldn't break. It would be colder and colder, longer and longer and longer, and it's, like, into May and into June, and, like, it's still cold, and, like, what is going on? And by the time they think, okay, we have to leave, they try to basically contact Symbia and open the gate or flee, and the trees are dead, right? And they can't do it. It's like they needs a living tree. Like, the ground is, so it's like thick with permafrost, and they just can't do it. It doesn't work. And then the winter is so cold and so oppressive that it even kills the pine trees, the evergreens, right? Like, I think that's really cool. Because then, or petrifies the forest or whatever. It's like flash frozen. Because then you can do a thing where, like, Coombe is slowly getting its wood back. Coombe is getting wood, right? It's going to get, like, wood in the morning. Like, morning wood? No, Coombe is, like, on the mend, so maybe the trees are starting to grow again. Maybe not in this forest only, everywhere, but, like, if it killed all the trees in Coombe, essentially, right? That over the course of the past 50 years, as it started to break, that now there would be new growth in Coombe again, and that's an interesting idea. But would the elves? How would the elves react to that? We'll talk about that in present day. They can no longer function like activity intends, and they are trapped. And they are unable to escape by magical means. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Do you like elves? Do you like Ragnarok? want elves? Need Ragnarok? Elves for Ragnarok. Trees shatter if it gets too cold. You guys, the shatter wood. What about the shatter wood? That sounds so metal. You like Shatterwood? I like Shatterwood. Alan, can you send pictures of shattered trees that are cold and put them in the Discord? I want to see them. Shattered boughs could be cool. So I think the forest is dead. You know what I mean? It's just too goddamn dead. And like I think there's even this sense among the elves that like why didn't they die? Like why the forest died and they somehow lived, and the things they had to do to live, they had to sacrifice a lot of what it means to be an elf. So they sacrificed their vegetarianism. They sacrificed, I'm sure they hunt, but like they eat only meat now. They sacrificed their sort of fireless existence where they didn't burn wood, and they sacrificed their love, right? And now they're just this different people. We should talk about their politics a little bit. The frozen cradle. Ooh, that's so dark. It's so dark. I wonder what elves. What is elven burial rites like? The snow elven ones would be totally different, right? Because it's a different culture essentially. But like, yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Because like burying them in the ground doesn't feel right. I wonder if they do bury them, or they do that like that kind of new age burial thing where it's like they plant a tree or something like that. I wonder if it's something along those lines. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about their politics a little bit. So, what were they once like? Former and present. So if they were a satellite of Symbia back in the day, they presumably would have some kind of similar authority. They would have been led by a druid. Well, this is interesting. Yeah, so this is a thing in Symbia, and this is maybe then indicative of things in like broader elven culture. But Symbia, at least in Allheliog, is led by a married couple, is led by a marriage. And I like the idea of that holding true, that like it's about a relationship, it's not about a figure. So I think it's like a similar thing where you get, a druid and somebody else. And one of them I think is usually a druid, but it's like a marriage rules, a relationship, two lovers rule. Tree burials, Posaras, they cremate them. Oh yeah, they cremate them now. That's cool. I dig that. They cremate them now. You could also do something like the ash wood or the burn wood. I guess you have the torch wood, but I like the idea that if they burn it, it's like a thing. They once reviled fire, but now embrace it. Embrace it. Like, I like the idea. Oh, dude, the wildfire druid is totally a thing now. Wildfire druid. The snow elves would be all fucking about that. Oh, is that not a thing? No worries, dude. It could be a thing in Undune, right? We could just say that's what happens. Because, like, we're talking about magical gold. So before, they were ruled by a... Now, elves in Undune don't marry for life, which is what's interesting. It's common in elven culture to Like they are very fluid in their relationships and they are very fluid in their identities. It is not uncommon for elves to change gender a couple of times over the course of their 1,000 years. It's common for elves to, like, they're very changeable is sort of the idea, right? So it's common for elves to, marry someone or fall in love with someone, when they're 100 and live 100 years with them and have children. And then when they get to be 200, it's not weird for them to separate and go off. It's not even like a divorce. It's just like it's odd for marriages to last longer than a century. Sometimes they last less, sometimes they last more, and that's like seen as being unusual. But the notion is if you lived for 1,000 years, you wouldn't be expected to stay with one person, right? It's like a common. You might be single for a century. You might have a couple of failed relationships that don't really work, over the course of that time. And these are, again, elves living amongst elves. Elves that live amongst humans presumably have different cultures. But they might go and they might live amongst humans for 100 years or something like that, and then go back to living amongst elves. Like, they're very changeable. Think of it as like having 10 lives rather than having one life. Yeah, no worries, dude. Oh, that's cool, Vaughn. So they, yeah. I mean, it would definitely be, it wouldn't be every year, right? Like they would have a new marriage, but I love the idea that it's tied to seasons. And so because it's still winter, no one can like make a new relationship in spring. I mean, I feel like eventually they would like get over that custom. That might be one of the contributing factors to the fact that they don't have children anymore. Yeah, dude. There's like a cultural significance to the seasons. And so in the way that like dwarves wouldn't care because they live underground. They don't give a shit about the seasons. There's a cultural, because it's all about trees, right? Significance to the seasons. Spring is the season of love and of like new love, right? Like of new love and attraction and flirtation. And attraction and flirtation. Oh, summer is totally the season of sex. Summer is the season of sex and love making, right? Like spring is all about flirtation and attraction and crushes and stuff like that. Summer is the season of sex and love making. Autumn is the season of like, I want to say like, is it the season of childbirth or like? Oh, like would you have children in spring then? Because I feel like the autumn is like the season of like thoughtful. It's like not romance, but like the season of like, marriage almost, and like long-term enduring love. I don't know what the word for that is. That's really cool. And so they're stuck in winter. Winter is like the season of winter is the season, sorry, of something. Like that middle stage of the relationship where you're really comfortable, Winter is the season of like solitary and loneliness and reflection. It's like when the relationship ends is in the winter. Well, I don't know if they're. Oh, that's true. Autumn is when you harvest. Well, that's true. Yeah. But they don't. I don't know if they really harvest. So I don't know if they really. I guess they would presumably be farmers. I don't know. So yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if you. It seems like then. Yeah. So autumn is the season of childbirth. Yeah. Okay. So no one is pregnant in winter then. Is the season of childbirth. I mean, and again, here's one thing we have to factor in that like. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think anyone. I mean, somebody is right. Like, they deliver babies in the summer. Yeah, but I think this is different because elven society is just on its head, right? That like it's not about like productivity in the farms. It's about how the person feels. Like summer thematically is the season of sex and romance and like love making. Autumn is the season of childbirth when you reap, right? You sowed earlier in the year and now you reap and you have your children. And then winter is the season of reflection and sort of the breaking of relationships and things like that. So, you might get married. Let's say you get married in the year zero, or let's say you meet your beloved in the year zero, and you would meet them in the spring, presumably. And like meeting someone in the spring is seen as being, maybe that's when like elves move around, they go to different communities because they try to meet new people. But you would fall in love in the spring, right? And then you would spend a long time, I think, in that stage. It wouldn't just be like one spring you met someone and you fell in love. It's like we are in the spring of our relationship right now, right? Yeah. And then when summer in your relationship comes along, there's like a pivotal summer, like everything builds that particular summer. So you might be in spring for 10 years with someone, and then you would say, okay, now we're in the summer of our relationship, and it's when it's the most passionate, and that's the most arguments are in that time, right? Like it's all that sort of young puppy love stuff, and that might last 20 years, and that might last 5 years, and then you would eventually bear a child, right? I don't think the elves procreate at the same rate. I think elves can like have sex and 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 not just instantly get pregnant. Humans are different. I think humans like meant to breed. So I think humans will have children much more frequently, whereas elves, I think it almost has to be like under the right conditions, you know. Um, and then the autumn lasts however long it lasts. You like raise the child and get them ready and like do that for 10, 20 years, and then the relationship kind of withers and dies, right? Maybe it's amicable, maybe it's not, and that's the winter of the relationship. So the idea that they are stuck in this time, that they're always in winter, and so it's never like a good time to go and fall in love with someone. It's never a good time to go have sex with someone. It's winter. It's the time when you sit and you think and you're alone. Yeah, man. Elves have a pouch like a koala. No, they don't stay pregnant that long. I'm just saying that like that's the season that like if you're going to give birth, it's probably going to be in the autumn, right? Like it's a cultural idea. It's not like a hard. It's not about their biology, right? Like it's about their culture and how their culture views the seasons. May December relationship is going to have vast age differences for elves. And elves, yeah, if elves have to stay pregnant longer, okay. I mean, who says that elven pregnancy works like human pregnancy? They're fairies. Like, who the fuck knows, right? There was a period when we were talking about the idea of the dwarves not being able to give birth to children, by physically fashion children. This is fantasy, people. We can do whatever the hell we want. So what I'm saying is that, like, culturally, they are stuck in winter. Like, mentally. It's hard for elves to conceive of, like, hope and renewal in this time period, right? That they're so focused, Game of Thrones style, on the seasons. Yeah, that's a great idea, Vaughn. I love it. I'm super into it. I know I kind of twisted it into something different, but I think I would never have thought of that, even though we're all about the winter. They're ruled by a couple, a pair of lovers, perhaps married, perhaps not, who each exemplified necessary traits of fucking leadership. How long was that? It honestly wasn't that long. Maybe 2 or 3 rulers over the course of their time in Coombe before the Seven Sorrows. One ruler is probably a druid, deemed culturally important. Wood elves. The other ruler is commonly a ranger or fighter, but neither of these roles are set in stone. Yeah. Okay. Do elves have a stage in their development where they plant them in the earth, or just not on a tree? Seeds. Yeah, Seelie on Seelie, right? It's like it's all about the relationship. I don't know if they like I don't think they physically. I don't think they like biologically do that. No, but that's what I'm saying is like we could do stuff like that, right? We could make decisions where they work differently. Um, like they could have a pouch, like a koala, cannon. I don't think they go so far as to do that. We did have the idea of, or there is canon in on Dune where certain children, maybe all children, are born at the same time. Like when they're born, a seed is planted, and then that tree has like magical and spiritual significance to the child. So in the child, Nimria has an ironwood tree, an ironwood like tree folk that protects her, and that's known as her sworn seed. So the idea being it was a tree that was planted when she was born, and it grew into this thing, and now it's here to protect her. Um, so I think there's a similar thing where like they have symbolic trees, but I don't know, and maybe the seeds are planted. I don't know. You could get there, but I don't think that's necessarily super relevant from where we are right now. So my question is, yeah, if it's about this like relationship, between these two people, it's never one person is in charge. It's always two. That's how their government works. How has that broken down? Obviously, it seems like whoever was ruling at that time. I mean, did it split? That's kind of cool, right? If the notion is that together two people ruled the whole elven nation or commune or whatever the hell we want to call it, the colony, that if it's about that relationship, that the modern day equivalent, the present day version of like the Seven Sorrows version of it would be that like they split like you would in Winter, and they took sort of half of the state with them in each direction. So you have this like these two sort of irreconcilable factions essentially. Yeah, the beliefs and their actions, the reasons they haven't grown. They are mentally trapped in Winter and perhaps ashamed of the changes that. Yeah, that's totally right, Vaughn. That's exactly what it is. I do think that they blame it on the elves, right? Or the elves. They blame it on the dwarves, and they view the dwarves as being the perpetrators of this. But like, it is definitely mental. I don't think it's a physical thing that's actually happened to them. I think the forest has undergone like a transformation that is maybe perhaps magical in some way. But I love the idea that it's like they can't break out of these habits, that they are mentally trapped in Winter. It's exactly as you say it, dude. That's perfect. That it's almost like an extreme form. I mean, that's maybe even part of it too, right? Is that like extreme form of seasonal affective disorder, right? Is it seasonal affective disorder? Elves are like the mentality, because the Eladrin in that way too, right? The mentality of the elves is mandated to some extent by what season? By the season. Yeah, I love that. So like they can't kind of get past this notion of Winter. That's great. Winter makes any birth impossible. Yeah. Spreads across the land. So then their politics right now, the marriage that was ruling the elves before. And I wonder, like, I think it is definitely mostly like a romantic or sexual relationship between these two people, but I think there have been cases in the past of the relationship being either like brother sister or like parent child and it not being sexual. I mean, probably there's an instance of it being like brother sister and it being sexual, like Targaryen style, because I feel like the elves don't have as many hang-ups about stuff like that. But I like the idea that like it could be any relationship theoretically. 90% of the time, I think it's a romantic relationship between these two people that rule. But like there are definitely instances of like a mother son or like a brother sister or whoever who ended up ruling together for whatever reason. They had like the closest bond. I get like the idea of like the twins that ruled. That's really interesting to me, right? It was ruling the elves before, and they probably have some word for it, like pact or something like that. That isn't, like pact is a word that could mean like a marriage pact, right? But it isn't like nailed down, or like maybe it's a union. Or something like that, like between these two people where it's like implied to be romantic or sexual, but isn't 100% that. Isn't explicitly that. My sample size of what, Vaughn? I heard someone. I don't think it has to be. I think it's interesting. I think like again, it's like the rules are made to be broken thing, right? Where like because I can see like two best friends ruling, right? Like where there's no sexual relationship. I think it's like 90% of the time it is, but it's more interesting if every once in a while you have a difference, right? And that causes a lot of scandal, that like the fact that they don't conform to what we expect. That's the thing with like world building rules like this is that you don't want to make anything that's like hard and fast because it's to me that's what's so fascinating about making a rule is like, well, what about the one time when it's not true? So I think most of the time it's romantic, and that's like the elven ideal because they're all about love. But every once in a great while, you end up in a situation where, for whatever reason, you get these slightly different relationships, and it's scandal, and it maybe doesn't work out or whatever, right? But most of the time, I think it's a romantic. The marriage that was ruling the elves before the Seven Sorrows dissolves, as all marriages do. I like it being like unions or something like that. Marriages do. I think dynast is the term that I used to describe the elves in Symbia, because I liked the idea of it being that unbroken line of druids, but I don't know if the colonies would have similar like heritage stuff. And as such, the population was severed. There are now two distinct camps of elves. One who follows one partner, and one who follows another. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm just talking about rulers. I think that like the elves definitely have other relationships in their lives. I think autumn relationships are mostly parent-child, right? And I think winter is all about being alone. That's cool, Vaughn. I like that. Druidy-based novel I read years ago, and druids didn't have hang-ups of sex of mentors or students. Even some snarways demanded it. The ranger is a social step below druids. So the druid is the leading figure, but on the understanding that the ranger would take the druid's place in case of the druid. Yeah, that's cool. Kind of like a vice president. I could see something like that. Like I think they do place a lot of value on the druid culturally, that it is way more important. But I don't necessarily see it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's cool. I like the notion that one can't function without the other, but one. It's almost like the dwarves' view on trade, where it's like they value wealth, and wealth you get from the earth is better than other wealth, but they can't really function with only that kind of wealth because they need trade in order to get food and wood and other things that they need. So I think it's like, yeah, the elven culture values the druid more, and the druid maybe has more social power and maybe even more governmental or executive power, and the ranger is seen as being below that, but the elven society doesn't function without the ranger, as Galadriel puts it, without the arrows, the slender arrows of elven bows, I think is how she describes Lothlorien being defended. So, okay, what are these two different camps? If they've split, which I think is really cool, partner 1 and partner 2. It feels like it should be like on philosophical grounds, but like what's interesting is that you could play with the idea that like they are still divided, or that like they're still in power. Whoever was ruling back then is maybe still around because it's only been 500 years. So it's like the same people. I mean, maybe you've had some turnover or something like that, but I kind of like the idea that at least one of the two of them, if not both of the two of them, are still alive and still in power, because it would be intensely personal for them then. All these things that have happened. It wouldn't just be like my ancestors. It would be I was here. You get that. I think Matt Colville talks about that time abyss thing with Elrond, where he talks about the fall of Gil-galad, right? And he's like, I was there that day thousands of years ago, when many fair things did fade or whatever. So I think it's kind of cool that at least one of them is still alive. Yeah, that's cool. Maybe there weren't rangers. Well, there definitely had to be rangers just because of the time period, but the notion of like rangers have become the necessity now over the druid. That the druid, like, the trees don't answer. That's kind of cool. What if the traditional, like, elven druid, focused on trees and plants no longer functions in the Shatterwood? What if other types, such as the Circle of the Moon or the Wildfire Druid, arose to take the place of the traditional forest druid? That like druidry, like forest magic, stopped working for them, you know? Oh, Romantics versus Fromians. Oh, one chose to stay, while the other tried to leave Coombe but were trapped. One chose to stay. One attempted to leave. So that feels like a geography thing. It's cool. I like that. It's a very, like, I like there being like a hard, this is the distinction. And you could see that being a split that would be like an interpersonal split. You know, that like, you could see it being like, you know, why can't you, like one, like the person who left the relationship essentially, who's like, I'm going to go out, you know, like is I need to move on, or like the person who broke up with the other one is the one who tried to leave, you know, because they why can't you stay? Why don't you believe in me? Why don't you believe in us? Kind of a thing. I think that's cool. But geographically, it's like they got trapped. Like where? Or are they in the same place? But because I could see them also potentially having triggered an avalanche, like on their attempts to leave or whatever. I like that distinction. The forest druid would have wanted to stay, so the druid stayed. The druid, and then the one who took the lead would have been the ranger. I mean, that makes sense, you know, trying to find, there's a way out, there's no way out. Yeah, I like that, the stay and the leave. So what happened to each one of these groups? Like, obviously, for the druid, they remain in the valley, and have done terrible things to stay alive, or what they consider to be terrible things. They worship fire. Give your life for the other. Put the other in front of you. I thought you were making a joke. Fromians, the art of love, usually state to be loved more pragmatically. Yeah, that makes sense. So, is one of them more romantic? I think they worship fire in this case means that's the group. One attempted to leave, the ranger. They were trapped. Like, are they wandering Coombe then? Because, like, that's the other option, right? But it feels like that defeats the purpose of the elves if they're all kind of stuck there. I mean, you could have two different groups of them, I guess. They wander Coombe. Like, they managed to escape the valley, but they found there's... So, again, geographically, one way we're advantaged is that Coombe... Like, it's kind of like Alaska. Like, it juts out into... Alaska's actually a good touchstone for Coombe. I don't know why I never made that connection before. It's going east instead of west, but it's like a peninsula that juts out of the main continent, and it's like very rugged and isolated and most easily accessible via ship. It's totally like Rubicos, Alaska. I wonder if I maybe even base it geographically in size on Alaska to get a sense of how far distances are. That's cool. Why did I never think of that before? The Wander Coombe in band. So if you wanted to talk about like the elves that... Yeah, I think you're right, Alan. That's just what I was thinking about. It's accept necessity. The other see it as the abomination to their roots. Oh yeah, you could flip it. Yeah, they wander in bands. I like that term. They've atomized. Now gone solo and wandering and roaming Coombe. The wilds in small groups, or solo. I think they're predominantly solo, but I do think every once in a while, it's more dramatic to find there's 3 of them or there's 2 of them or whatever. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Stubbornness, selfish pride. I like the idea. I think I might make them same sex because I think that that's more interesting. We don't have a lot of predominant same sex couples right now in the campaign. I think that's kind of neat. I see them as being 2 guys. Could be 2 women too, but I like the idea that it's 2 guys. Yeah, that's very cool. These are great, you guys. I'm really excited about this. I think that's a good handle on them. Oh, and another reason that Shatterwood works really good is they broke apart. They shattered. Yeah. Yeah, dude. I'm into it. Even if trees don't really work that way, they work that way in my world. So let's talk a little bit about, we have 15 minutes. Do you guys want to do hooks and threats for them? What are some potential adventures? Ooh, yes. Don't do women as 2C team. The Elvish deities are... Oh, yeah, right. It's Maliki and Malith, right? Yeah, that's great, dude. They're gender fluid. They have both been male and female, but they're stuck in their current forms. That's the right answer. Male has been both, but due to winter is stuck in their current form. That's a good. Oop, not female, male. Has been both, but due to winter, stuck in their current form. That's a great idea. Let me put that up here under seasons. Dude, this season thing I think is what busted this out for me. That's awesome fun. Spring is the season of gender fluidity. That's the coming out season, essentially. When elves make the determination about how they feel. Again, it's not every year, but if they're going to make that realization, it's when they're in the spring mindset, That's so good. I love that, you guys. And it makes them feel chaotic, which is good, but not chaotic in a flighty, nonsensical way that they're sometimes presented. But it makes them feel old, and it makes them feel inhuman, which is another thing that I think is really important. They have an ethereal quality to them that's so important to being an elf. Yeah, man, I love it. So we have about 15 minutes. Do you want to talk about hooks and plot threads we could do, or do you want to jump to a different race? Because I kind of want to talk about orcs. Because I'm worried that the orcs and the elves are now kind of stepping on each other's toes. So we might need to tweak the orcs in a certain way to make them work if we want to do that. We could always do orcs another day. We have 15-ish minutes. Let me see, because I might be able to squeeze a little bit of extra time out of this. Let me check something really quick. I forget if I have the space reserved up to a certain point. I will check and then get back to y'all. If we have a little more time, I probably want to dive into orcs if we can. Because I feel like I have a pretty good handle on humans. I think I have it later? I don't know. Let me see. Because normally I would assume it would only be till 7:30. It's my normal. Let's talk orcs. I'm into orcs. Yeah. Okay, so I'll break it down, at least get it started. And then if we have to end early, we can do another one another time. Sorry, it seems like there's a lot of lag. Let me check. Booking. How long am I in this space? But the conceit with orcs is that they are from the central continent of Aros, which is what Yoggoth eventually becomes. And they are, we've talked about this a couple times now, but they are sort of a nomadic, nature-worshipping people, in some ways similar to elves, but whereas the elves are a lot more... That's interesting, actually, thinking about the, Yeah, I have until 7:30, so we only have 15 minutes. Okay, Well, we'll try to be quick. The Hers needed food, and the cave's the only place they could be found. Maybe mushrooms are like it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So they are nomadic people, and they wander the steppes and the wild places of Aros, and they are warlike to some extent. They fight against each other. They value the hunt. They have personified their 6 deities as 6 animals, different traits of whom they want to ape. So, the boar and the owl and the hyena and the ape and I forget what wisdom is, the eagle, I think, and then the wolf. So it's like, they're all animal focused. They have, their religion also views the earth as being sacred, and so they try to do as little damage to the earth as possible. They view the animals as being like equals to them. So they hunt and they kill, and all their products come out of animals, but they don't, again, very Mongolian or Inuit, as Alan pointed out. But all their clothing and their weapons and their tools and everything is all organic and specifically animal product. So it's a lot of cheeses and milks and meats and like hides and things like that. But they are by no means like an evil race at all. They're just sort of pastoral and herding and fearsome in war because of this. But they are not. They don't really build great towers. They don't really do a lot of those things because they view stone and wood as like sacred materials. I like the idea that they have like great, structures made of bones. Like the animals of Aros are much bigger than the animals of anywhere else. So this would allow them to make crazy like long houses and stuff like that out of the like ribs of giant monsters. Yeah, orcs were nomadic. I don't think so. I don't think they work stone either. I like the idea that it's all bone. And that's their primary thing. They can like, if given weapons, they can wield them potentially, but they view like marring or harming the earth as being, and it's just an idea I was playing with. I like the idea that they're animal based, as being in some way, harmful. I bet they would use deadfall and stuff like that in the same way that orcs would, or the same way that elves would. Maybe they would use stones if they're around. But again, the more animal we can make it, the better. So in Coom, in the context of Coom, the orcs then are one of the 3 great sister empires that sort of founded the modern world. There's the elves from Emeros, and the dwarves from Rubicos, and then the orcs from Auros. And these adventurers at the beginning of the recorded time formed this adventuring party, and that sort of allowed these 3 empires to meet and contact each other and create this pact, this alliance. And the orcs were one of them, along with elves and dwarves. Humans existed, but they were not unified enough to have an empire. So that happened, and that the king at that time was a sort of controversial figure named Durzov the Dubious, and his daughter was the second queen of Coom, and she found herself in a civil war against a house or clan, Glimmergem, who tried to usurp the throne. I'm just trying to go really quick. And she ended up because she realized the queen wasn't prepared to go to war against other dwarves, she ended up inviting a bunch of orcs, presumably the tribe or allies of her father's orcish friend in the adventuring party that sort of founded the modern world. And they came to Coom and they helped her win this war. They're basically orcish mercenaries. I liked the idea that it was a whole horde, so it was the women and the children and everyone. It was like an orcish tribe. Again, they used the word horde, that came and settled in Coom. And it was somewhat of a controversial opinion, but at this time the dwarves are largely underground, so they're not too concerned with what actually happens on the surface. Humans have not really begun to live in Coom. Elves have not really begun to live in Coom yet. So in the timeline, orcs are the first non-dwarven people to be like basically relocated and settled there. There are great mammoths that live in northern Rubicos, and there are caribou and whales and seals and all kinds of stuff for them to hunt and beasts for them to worship. And so the notion was that we got a lot. Oh, the mold bones? That's really cool. Lightning magic is awesome. Those are all really cool. Yes. Okay, let me put some of that stuff under culture. Like bone mancers or whatever. Bone mancers can shape bone to suit their needs. I love that. Lightning magic for battle and hunting. Yeah, and they definitely have druid style like transformation stuff. I think that they basically invented the barbarian. Orcish barbarian. Oh, that's invented barbarian and specifically lycanthropy. I think lycanthropy is an orcish like weapon. It's a thing that they would infect their soldiers with that turn them into giant monsters and help them fight better. And it has since spread and jumped species. But it's specifically like almost like the Vikings, right, with their berserkers. Or you can even think of the Zulus have their psychotropics, right? That made them very difficult to kill in battle. That it's specifically like a weaponized disease that the orcs used against their own people to turn them into monsters in battle. Yeah, and that's like this. It's like a religious frenzy. So okay, the question is, the orcs lived on the tundra, and the open spaces, the steppe of Coom. It's a lot of open area in between the mountains, the high meadows and things like that. And so once they won the war for the queen, they were basically given like, cool, go wherever you want, roam wherever you want to. They breed relatively fast, but I didn't want them to be like a rampaging problem. I think every once in a great while in the long history of Coom, the orcs have kind of like reared up and been a problem. You know, particularly a powerful warlord takes over them, that kind of a thing. But I don't think that they are the menace that they are in other places. They're much more agreeable neighbors than they are traditionally portrayed in fantasy fiction. And that's fine, I think, for most of their history. You don't have to go too deep into that kind of thing. But the question is, like, the Seven Sorrows, how would they have weathered them? Because, like, I think I want them to be a part of the campaign in the present day, but I don't see them leaving, especially if they breed really quickly and they've had, hundreds of generations of orcs have grown up and lived here, that they wouldn't think that they could leave or they would have nowhere to go functionally. They could maybe leave with the humans, but I think it's cooler if they stay. And the question is how. If the whole point of the elves is that they like endured the cold, then you can't really have the orcs do the same thing and just be fine, because it kind of takes away the sacrifice of the elves. Osteomancers. Hey, what's up, Jordan Fuzz? Thanks for all your comments on YouTube, my friend. It's very cool to like actually talk to you, because like you always leave these great comments. And I feel bad. I need to respond to more of those, but I always see them the night after. So what is going on there? Like, my instinct, of course, is that they osteomancers is good. Osteomancers, bonatologists. My thought is that they went underground. They sought refuge in caves from the winter in caves and eventually became trapped. I liked your idea, Vaughn, that their herds had nothing to eat, and so they led them underground. Maybe it's like I forget the character's name, the legend in Game of Thrones, but there's a story about wildlings who hid underground to avoid going to war, and they ended up becoming trapped there, and they lived there forever. It's like Geb or Ged or something like that. I wonder if it's a similar thing. Their herds beneath the earth to eat the fungi. Sorry, this is also messy. The fungi and lichen that grew there. Over time, they morphed, or they because they breed so quickly, they quickly adapted to these new conditions. Two groups of orc survivors as well. Those went underground like lycanthropes. Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, because I don't know if I want to say they're monsters, but like the idea of there being like orcs who live as beasts, I think is really cool. Yeah. Because they breed so quickly. Because yeah, I wanted some presence of them on the surface. I didn't want to just like they all turn into Morlocks. The underground orcs quickly adapted to their new surroundings and became Grimlocks. I might call them something like Grim Orcs or something like that. But something like that. What we functionally think of as a Grimlock, like an eyeless underground hunter. An eyeless underground hunter. I know there's like the Roth are a thing in FR. I never super liked them. They're like deep cows. But maybe there's like an equivalent. That they like, if they brought their herds and their caribou down below. Okay, so let's say perhaps they split into 2 groups. Group 1. And then group 2. It's a little similar to the elves in that they split, but I do like the idea of both. I like both ideas. They're just wild, yeah. And I don't even know that the Grimlocks are corrupted by Yogg. They certainly could be. Were they corrupted by Yogg? How do they interact with troglodytes? The orcs that remained on the surface used lycanthropy to survive and dwelled permanently as great beasts, wolves and bears and lions. I like the idea of like killing a giant bear, that there's like there's a pass or an area that's guarded by this like seemingly too intelligent bear, right? And it's like it hunts the caravans and it's very rapacious, you know. Rapacious is my word lately, but it's very ornery and protective and territorial, and it seems too smart, and its like hide is embedded with weapons because no mortal weapon can harm it. And the party finally manages to track it down and kill it, and then it reverts back into an orc, and you realize it's one of these lycanthropes. Yeah, that's cool. Let's see. I mean, that basically is it right there. Dwelling in animalistic packs and prides. They think of themselves more as beasts than as orcs, but are nonetheless the more deadly opponents. Yeah, that's cool. Okay. That's true, yeah. That's definitely true. Or they might have, conflicted. I like the idea of the elves as being these like survivalist hunters. They have different tactics. The elves become the hunter and the orcs become the beast. I think that's kind of neat. Politics. I mean, I think Group A. I think before they would have had sort of traditional orcish politics. They essentially have like a Khan or like a leader. But I think the underground Group 1, retained that. I mean, I think it depends. If the Grimlocks are corrupted by Yogg, then I think you would get like a priestly cast would emerge who worship Yogg. But I don't know that they have been corrupted, because I think they would have to go pretty deep. That like the things that live really, really deep down there would, but like if the dwarves were never really corrupted, then it seems like why would the orcs be yet? The orcs do get corrupted in Aros and their home continent at a later date when Yogg starts to sort of tear the earth open, but that hasn't quite happened yet. So we could talk about it, certainly, and there definitely could be some. Yeah, that's cool. That's a good way of thinking about it. It's all about their physicality versus their culture. The orcs are of the body and the elves are of the mind. Yeah, that's cool. Chieftainses? Yeah, they could definitely have chieftains. And I think that's the classic, right? Chieftains or khans or whatever. Group 2. If not, Grimlocks. Because again, I think that like, I kind of like the idea that they're not evil still. That like just going underground and living underground didn't make them evil. It maybe made them like, I want to find something that's different, because like I definitely could see the party coming into conflict with Grimlocks, and having to fight Grimlocks, and there being Grimlock territory and stuff like that. But I don't necessarily want it to just be like now they're evil and mad, because I don't think that the Grimlock is just the corrupted version of the orc. I don't think that they're ugly. I think they're just like they're ugly in the sense of like how a human would look at an orc and find it ugly. I don't see them as being like hideous in this setting. Definitely there are ugly orcs, and especially during sort of Yogg's period when there's a lot of mutation among the orcs, they get to be more traditionally ugly. But I don't see them as being ugly. They're definitely bestial. They're animalistic, but I don't see them as sort of the traditional like porcine ugly monster. You know, like I'm an orc kind of a thing. They're big and hulking and again primal, but I don't. They're almost more like a caveman or a Neanderthal. And if you think that's ugly, then okay, sure, right. But that's more what I'm imagining, like a Neanderthal rather than like a big green monster. Just a competitor for underground resources, yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. We'll have to figure something out societally, because I think you want to have them change. I mean, maybe that's the point, is that the orcs didn't really change societally. They changed physically, but not societally, you know? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't say that. And again, I think the ones that are revolting are like have sort of demonic or infernal influence. So if you think of Throka from All Hail Yogg, Throka Tentusk, she's definitely had like Yogg's influence. She's what you would call a demon in All Hail Yogg. She was like originally an orc, but she had enough. Or, you know, on Dune, demons are basically creatures that have had Yogg's influence, like they've absorbed it like radiation, you know, whereas a devil is a fiend that Yogg has basically crafted or made, has been specifically designed. They will eventually get there, but I only think some of them. There are a lot of orcs in the world that don't live in Aros and don't end up becoming evil. You know what I mean? It would still have herds, do you think? Yeah. Oh, beetles is cool. Giant bugs is better. Yeah, giant bugs is better than herds. That's really cool, Vaughn. Than cattle. They had cattle for a while. They had caribou, but they couldn't cut it, so they started to like raise giant bugs. That's really neat. Yeah, dude. No, they're not corrupted, I don't think. Their society is essentially the same. And like Orcish society did have sort of periods of bloodshed and raiding. Like they do that sometimes. So I think you can still have them be enemies, right? Again, they're just competing for resources, but they're not evil. They are led by a chieftain or a khan. I want to find the Orcish word for that. Or a khan. Orcish is interesting because it uses in the way that Elven, the language, every word in Elven has two concurrent vowels. Every word in Orcish has two concurrent consonants. So you get that. So Khan actually would be like a good word for it. Oh, there could be Ankegs. Yeah, I think there's all kinds of stuff. Led by a chieftain or a Khan, and they herd giant underground insects. Fire beetles, Ankhegs. I think an Ankheg is like a sheepdog. Yeah, tattoos are big. I think they have a different purpose than dwarven tattoos, but yeah, I dig that. I love the idea of an Ankheg. It's like it's got the acid to spit at bugs, to scare them away. And maybe the acid is like damaging to humans, but it's not damaging to other bugs. You know, it's more like a pheromone. And then group 2, their society is a little changed and more resembles the beasts they impersonate. Lion prides or wolf packs. You will occasionally find a were-orc living alone as a bear or an eagle. Yeah, I think tattoos are big. I'm not sure what they do beyond just being tribal. they're all about flesh. So I think tattoos and scars. I think that's one thing we talked about in All Hell Yogg is that the orcs have like ritual scars that they go over. Could be an identifier. I think that's cool. Identifier. It's essentially like a name tag. Like zebra stripes. Zebra stripes. Looking at an orc can tell you their tribe or their horde. And maybe even some of their accomplishments. Yeah, thanks. I should probably take off too, but I think that's good. The ink wounds as part of triage and don't tattoo. How we think of them. Yeah, that's cool. Scars are like wounds are healed with ink. Healed with ink. Made from other animal blood. Dependent on which blood. It might give the orc magical properties. It's like blood magic. Yeah, blood magic. All about sacrifice. Could explain the Garubsh one eye thing too, right? That's cool. Yeah, we can get into hooks and threats another time. We gotta talk about humans, but this is great. This was a great stream, everybody. I'm really happy where we landed with elves. I love, Vaughn, your distinction of the season thing, obviously, but I love Vaughn's distinction between saying that orcs changed physically and elves changed culturally and spiritually. Yeah, guys, this is great work. Cool. Yeah, we'll be back next week with another stream. I'll put the thread back up. I'll put the poll back up. It'll be a real poll this time. I'm sure Brooke went off to bed, but I hope that she liked that we finally got to talk about elves. One of the ones I really want to do is a map stream. I was thinking about trying to figure out a way to configure the camera that way I could draw. But I think what I might do is I might get my markers and draw on this whiteboard back here, and we could talk about the map of Coom. I have like a rough idea in my head, I think, of what it looks like, but I would want to like do a rough copy here, and then we could start to place some of the fantastic locations. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's great. It's always like right at the very end. I think we only go for about 2 hours. Well, good morning, Druid and Fuzz. It's nice to see you. I hope that you enjoy the stream whenever you catch it. Thanks for coming out. It's awesome to see you. Great. Well, we'll be back next week. Thanks everybody for tuning in and for all your wonderful ideas. I think this is going to be a really cool setting once we finally get there. She'll get there sooner rather than later, I would hope. Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a good night, and I will talk to you all next week. Until then, stay hairy, beardos.